in regard to what's before us, man. I mean, you have gender confusion. We have that DEI that has now apparently been uh, exposed to be um, not accomplishing what I think the intent and desire was originally. Something else about this is that I was an advocate for individuals with disabilities, and I have preached long and hard for the topic or on the topic of inclusion. And I did find myself at the end of at my advocacy work for 25 years, just a few years ago, that basically we kind of stopped, at least to the level that we were doing it. But what we're seeing is those that would have advocated for individuals with disabilities, those that were unable to accomplish a thing, to be abled, to be enabled. That turned into an individual that had cognitive disabilities through no fault of their own, uh, suddenly got in grouped in with people that, well, let's just get into the thing, because what they grouped into is these dimensions of human identity. That is what we're going to talk about. I'm not going to get in a hurry. So if you're going to study with me, I'm glad it's on YouTube because that's a little easier to watch at the house. But look, you can comment below if you've got questions. Then I'll be happy to talk about this because I'm not sure that I'm through in my study. I'm working on this and developing it more because of what's going on in our world. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is defined like diversity is the presence of differences in dimensions of human identity. That's 100% accurate. Now, what happened in that definition is a result of something we teach in school now, but we don't want to talk about that, and we're going to talk about that this year in the state of Arkansas. We've talked about it in the state of Texas before, and that is how we got here. And is there freedom in exposing your mind to anything you can imagine that you can be? And now we know what I'm going toward is people imagine themselves to identify with something they're not and something that is not normal, natural. Okay. Diversity, equity, inclusion are three closely linked values held by organizations that are working to be supportive of different groups of individuals. See, this is where it becomes complex. We're going to help somebody. Well, how are we going to help them? Well, in the DEI platform, in that part of the world, you have races, religions, abilities. Now, and ethnicities. We're going to look at some of these terminologies in a minute. But I want you to notice that in the diversity that is referring to sexual orientation, and somehow that there is diversity and equity in sexual orientation. Well, I'm a man and my wife is a woman, and that would be the state through which procreation and the world would continue. Now, in other sexual orientations, there may be human gratification, but there is no sustaining of life or having anything to do with the sustaining of life. In fact, it works against it in many ways and can be proven. But this idea has turned into some very sick and perverted thoughts. And for that reason, we want to make certain that we have a bit of clarity in races, ethnicities, religions, abilities, genders, and social and sexual orientation. First of all, inclusion, we had that, and it was interesting because my advocacy work came in after the human rights for pigmentation of skin. And we use that term now because race is man created. We have nations that we know about in existence throughout history, but nations existed, but races did not. You only had pigmentation of skin. We created racism and we are perpetuating racism in our public school system. So you had races and abilities, but if we take out races, because like Morgan Freeman said, as soon as you quit talking about racism and my color of skin and your color of skin, then it goes away because we're human beings. We communicate, we talk, we produce, we engage in exactly the same behavior. And there's no thing that is inclusion, abilities. First of all, I'm going to have to unpack this as well. Diversity, the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and a different genders, sexual orientations, etc. In the diversity, it's taking into consideration not your ethnicity, now, how you were raised in the culture and the environment you were in, but man and woman, that's diversity. But man and woman, and then, well, I don't even know how to. Everything beyond what we see as the obvious is a product of the imagination of man. Sexual orientation has to do with, if you're saying orientation and it's something other than one you are married to, then it's going to be of a sinful uh, pursuit if you go for sexual gratification before marriage. I know that's antiquated and unreal because we live in a different culture. That's the problem. That is the problem. We've accepted something in our culture and not challenged our children to do better than we did. And so, actually, what we have is the product of those that would live riotously or wantonously or whatever, however you want to identify the word, of their own imagination. When you take those individuals and say, okay, whatever you have imagined yourself to be, you identify with a cat, then, or you identify yourself as a cat. And so we've got to make room for the gender that there is some sick stuff that is going on in the world today. And just let me say that when you talk about sexual orientation, they're talking about whatever you're attracted to. Nobody is ready to take that on except we have. And during this DEI demonstration, it was putting individuals, elevating individuals who really needed each other to understand what was going on in their life and their mind. Just like a person with a limited ability needed someone to help them understand what's going on in my mind or what's going on in the world or what's best for me, what's safe, and the aspects of equity enter in then. That is fairness, justice. Equity is the idea that people should be treated fairly and justly and that outcomes should be just and fair. Everybody agrees with that. Equity recognizes that people start from different places and imbalances need to be acknowledged. Imbalances. If we're talking about a mental imbalance, then yes, we all have differing abilities. If I get off on a run and I have something in my mind and I'm teaching and I'm what is true and I'm speaking something that's not what is true, then I need friends and people to say, hey, Dennis, where are you at? You slipped. Let me show you. And that's why we as Christians have this incredible responsibility. Equitable outcomes may require differential treatment and resource distribution. So I was part of the group that was able to get a human developmental center that is a place where you kept everybody in a cinder block building. It used to be where they would take people, what they called, that had mental illness and crazy, and they would put them in this building, and the room out back was just a padded wall building. And so they would isolate, and those individuals were only around other individuals that had similar disabilities. And it would be interesting for you to know that in that environment where you take a lot of individuals with disability, you corral them all together, then you have the exact same structure where you need DEI, because the strong are still trying to break down the weak, because there's an element missing that is only from the spiritual perspective, that is taken out when we go for orientations that are not founded in principles of truth. So the differential treatment is absolutely true. We are to warn the unruly, to uphold the weak, and to comfort those that are struggling. And I worry today, our culture, our society. Number one, you need to quit talking, quit cussing. The YouTubers and all these other things, man, get your language. That when I was understanding why people use profanity is because they didn't have a vocabulary large enough to use other words. So they just relegated themselves to this kind of a conversation. Yeah, no, it's not cool, not better, not smarter, not anything needs to be laid out. Inclusion, the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded and marginalized. Now, this is me. This was I spent a lifetime doing this. And those with physical and intellectual disabilities, or those with a minority group. They're going back. A minority group would be, so I'm from an ethnicity, or I'm from, the pigmentation of skin we got to get rid of, because that's the problem. And you're not going to like the end of this lesson, those of you that are in academia, because you're going to get very upset because you're the one that is perpetuating it. And I'm here to stop it. And I'm getting older, but now I got a platform. I can kind of speak the way I want and have as long as I want to talk about it. And hey, I'm supposed to invite you to please subscribe and like, do all of those things so that you can get the updates when we load material. Uh, got some phenomenal material coming up. This is a good year. We got a lot of teaching to do. Inclusion. So we don't want to marginalize, and what we're trying to do is to get unmarginalized. You're no longer on the fringe. We're trying to bring people in. We're going to see how that we can do that in a minute. That ethnicity, and you can unpack this any way you want and fast forward and go back, because it's going to take a bit, but I'm going to get it out there anyway. It's the quality or fact of belonging to a population or group or subgroup made up of people who share common cultural background and descent. So there you go. Now, I don't have much of a subgroup in history. I've got a little bit of knowledge about my grandparents on my mama's side, and a little bit of knowledge on my grandparents on my daddy's side. But that all got spread out with our world, and the things that happen in families. So I never got to know uh, my grandfather on my dad's side very well. And that subculture, like for me, is started with my dad, and whether or not we had the truth in the Bible. So how are we going to act? How are we going to behave? We didn't want to be like what happened to my father, or I mean my grandfather, and have that occur. So what do we do now? And let's just take ethnicity, because you got religious practice, disabilities, and sin marginalized. You're trying to say in this that you got a religious practice or people with disabilities, sin marginalized, has nothing to do with ethnicity. Okay. Now, a religion can follow an ethnicity, but as far as true, pure and undefiled religion, it's got nothing to do with ethnicity. Truth is truth. People are people. We do what we do, because in ethnicity, here's what you come up with: culture, that is, beliefs, foods, music, the vibe of our society. We have our history, our language, religion, traditions, things that we've just done because that's the way we've always done it, and then social treatment. I'm going to back that out, take the ethnicity out, put the religion, and show that it's religion. Not, you see, in a lot of you say, well, no, not religious. No, look, pure and undefiled religion, we're going to get to in a minute. Not religion of the world and not churchism and not churchy, whatever that is. I'm talking about pure and undefiled religion that those who belong to Christ's church engage in. And the shared social treatment is contradictory to what evolution does. So now we get down to removing these other ancestry and the language and these other things. And now we get down to how we dress, how we practice, we believe, what we believe, the values, how we dress, the music we listen to. A society begins to be influenced by that. And then we have the shared social treatment. So, what is the shared social treatment right now? Well, you got parties and you got fighting, and there's more fighting. So, the true DEI concept is found in spiritual truth, not in what we've been practicing. Didn't accomplish it, didn't even remotely begin to get there. Pure and undefiled religion before God the Father exists to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. So you have the old folks and the kids and everybody else that has the ability to choose and to make decisions keeps themselves unspotted from the world and remain pure and undefiled to help. Visit in James 1:27 doesn't mean that you go by and spend 5 minutes on an afternoon and say hi. It is knowing the needs and tending and making sure the needs are met. That's what it is. Now, unfortunately, we've had elevated those that have cognitive capacities to have we have elevated vain imagination, people that will walk out and have the most I could show you, but I won't. They have the most incredible attire, the way they present themselves, and say some of the most foul things. Those individuals need to be helped, need to be taught. And that's what we as a culture should be doing, helping. The strong help the weak, not the strong defeat the weak. And that's what I worry about any politics that oftentimes engages in that kind of thing. If someone is in a position where they have been weakened, marginalized, which I mean, I think the truth has been marginalized, to be honest, about everything, is that I have been fortunate to have a lot of freedom. There was a time when I didn't have much freedom. One time I got cut off the air. I was speaking the truth in love and read a Bible verse and he edited it being on. He had the power to do that. And he was in the name of religion, but he just didn't like the fact that I was reading a Bible verse that he just didn't want to hear. When we talk about strong bearing the infirmities of the weak, and we talk about inclusion, every human is included. That's what I wish that everyone who has felt themselves and been crying and so distraught about their identity and all of that. First of all, know this, inclusion is colorblind. So that's the first point that if we can get past, we'll get a lot further down the road. And I think that's happening. I do believe that is happening because you once had a society and political atmosphere that you had to be, if you were of a color you had to be in this party, if you were of a white or of another color you had to be in this party, and back and forth, and that's just not the truth. What it is we discern issues, the things that are important to what truth is, And then we begin to operate, function, and we accept born conditions. That's what I'm saying. Whatever an individual has, a disability, has a deformity, a particular skin pigmentation, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. What we reject in inclusion is vain imaginations that would undermine the very concept of visiting the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. Number one, if you have a homosexual family, you're not going to have fatherless. I mean, when you engage in, you're dead. Your lineage, your heritage is dead because there is no propitiation because you are putting into practice the eliminate. You take everyone on an island and everyone is going to embrace this lifestyle, sexual orientation, only with same sex. Guess what? You're extinct in one generation. In one generation, you're extinct. And how we would put this in is because we're inventors of evil things and deception is so smooth, particularly when you can climb into the realm of academia so that we can have that narcissistic Gnostic. I think Gnosticism was narcissism in its early stages. Gnostic says, I know it all and I'm spiritual, so I feel better and I am above all of you. The origin of prejudice. In Romans chapter 1, and it talks about the specifics of DEI in the problems that are therein. There are absolute. The DEI as it's set up in our government is completely a farce. The DEI that the Lord has set up is beautiful, and it's an incredible thing. But here's what we reject: men leaving the natural use of a woman, burn their lust one toward another, men with men committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of error which was due. This is in Romans chapter 1:27. Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to. Here's where the confusion came. God gave them over to a debased mind. What does that mean? It's void. It's no longer with the spiritual, intellectual component of truth. It is now in the realm of subjectivism of whatever I feel or whatever I think up. Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things that are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness and sexual immorality, sexual orientation other than what God had said, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They're whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things. Undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. And those God will judge in righteousness, those that practice such things. But not only those who practice such things, but those who approve of them. It's our approval that's in the way. Oh, I know there'll be conflict when someone disagrees, but that doesn't change the truth, nor does it change our telling of the truth. What we do is we begin to communicate in ways so that the truth is understood, speaking the truth in love. And yeah, that can be a very challenging thing. But the inventors of evil things, and I'm going to give you now the trail that is the one that, well, the logic is inescapable. So I'm not going to try to say anything other than what they say. This is in your children's classroom. The origin of the species by natural selection. Don't you like how that they've redone the title in the book page? Here's the original. And they took this off, but Darwin always believed it to be true. Said he was going to do another book that never came out about the proving. But that line right there says, and the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. So the story that we read in the history books of life is what he put into this terminology and wrote this kind of thing. Looking at the world in no very distant date, lower races will have been eliminated by higher civilized races throughout the world. That is a man whose statue sits in Washington, D.C. right now, revered. He had even this to say, looking at the world in no very distant date, lower races will be eliminated by higher races throughout the world. These are the letters to the life in the life of Charles Darwin. In the descent of man, the break between man and the nearest allies will be wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, and as we hope, even than the Caucasian and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of as now between the Negro and the Australian, or Australian and the gorilla. In the books. But what they do? Well, they rewrite it, or they edit it, or they change it out. But here's what the effect is. Stephen Gould, their own biological arguments for racism. See, there is no argument for racism. They're trying to put it in there. But race, we got one mom and daddy, one mother and father, all of us. There's a change in language at the Tower of Babel. Skin pigmentation, yeah, that's going on right now, you know. Uh, before 1859. But they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. That's what it brought us. That's what evolution brought us. So Herbert Spencer, now we're going to look at it as that survival of the fittest. What he says, he's taking the term, the struggle for favored races, and placing it into a economic theory. An economic theory, put that in your picture now. Who's producing? The ones that can produce them, they're worth more, and the others are, well, eventually they're just not worth much. In fact, if there's a disaster and you got the educated on one side, you got to give them the preferential treatment to those that are uneducated or in a remote area. What you begin to see is these principles that everybody brings up, or these accusations and all this uh, evil surmising that goes on. It goes on because nobody's really teaching that man is equal at all. In fact, if you stay in school long enough, you will lose faith in this, because this is so prevalent and blocks you. They block. That's what we're doing now in the state of Arkansas, is trying to get legislation passed, the freedom of information, the freedom to teach other theories that exist regarding how we got here, other than this. Herbert Spencer first used the phrase survival of the fittest. Darwin's, after reading Darwin's Origin of the Species, in his Principles of Biology of 1864, in which he drew parallels between his own economic theories and Darwin's biological ones. The survival of the fittest, which I have here sought to express in mechanical terms, that is which Mr. Darwin called nature, natural selection. If we were an animal, that might work. but we're created in the image of God. We have a spirit. So that gives us some trouble, doesn't it? I hope it does. But maybe it hasn't, because maybe we have not learned what that actually looks like. These are individuals that I understand in the time of Hitler's reign or regime, those individuals that had those cognitive disabilities that got out of that facility here in Arkansas in that time, they were used to test the lethality, if that's a word, the lethal, the killing effectiveness of the chamber. They would go get those guys. It's just the horror of racism. Didn't have color. I'm talking about nations. We're talking about true horror, invented and perpetuated by man. And it's time for us to look at other theories, because there are many holes. Brother Patton, who is with me, and if you'll get onto the What is True YouTube site and you just go start searching it, you can study and see the fact that that theory is not sound, it's not true. Here's what we know. James tells us, book of James, that when we enter into a relationship with him, if we have faith in the Lord Jesus and we hold it with partiality, and we do so from an economic or a pigmentation of skin perspective, we are becoming judges with evil thoughts. We're not becoming discerning, and we're not DEI. We are actually separating because of economic perspectives. When what we begin to learn, how we begin to see through skin pigmentation, and this is wonderful. This is if at the nursing home, you're between 80 and 100 years old, and you read, the outward man is perishing. Doesn't matter what color the skin is, it's going away. The inward man is being renewed day by day. That's what we all have. It's created in the image of God. And in inclusion, we don't accept vain imagination. We give attention to those that are confused. Now, if they reject it, and you warn a brother and he's going to be in rebellion, then you can't control that. They will be by themselves because they've separated themselves from you. But the members of the body which we seem to be weaker are necessary, and those members of the body that seem to be less honorable, on these we bestow greater honor, that our unpresentable parts have greater modesty, and our presentable parts have no need. So this is the picture of the community of the church, the culture of the church. It is where those that are in need are cared for, and then those that are able help. God composed the body, the church, the community, having given greater honor to the part that lacks it, that there be no schism, division in the body. You are Christ's body, and each of you is a member of it. That is when we begin to end racism, is when we begin to understand as a humanity that we're dependent upon one another. I know we strive and we yearn for independence, but no one is. Even the richest person in the world that can buy anything he wants is dependent upon others. So now we recognize the fact that interdependence and not survival of the fittest as taught by evolution or Darwin or Marx or any of the others that are unbelieving. But as a nation, we, one nation under God, was for the very pursuit of that interdependence that would be reflected in our care for each other. And does that mean we take, you don't behave just any way, because it has to be in harmony with the community that God has created. And it perpetuates itself. And it does find lawful means through which sexual gratification, through in marriage, through families being born, and how to, and raising children in a way that is nurturing, and they understand what is right and what is wrong. These are the things that we hope and pray that in the coming days, as we begin to develop and grow, that we will learn what inclusion is truly all about. Thank you for joining me for What is True, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and we'll get this worked out as far as the timing. But thank you for joining me. We pray that it's been a blessing to you. Check us out on Facebook, uh, What is True with Dennis Carroll and Don Patton, or YouTube, What is True with Dennis Carroll and Don Patton. Please subscribe, like, share, so that we can grow the audience and we can share this information from God's Word. His Word is spirit, His Word is life. May God bless us as we seek